My definition of codependency is when we are overly invested in the feeling states, the outcomes, the situations, the circumstances of the people in our lives to the detriment of our own internal peace. It struck me how presumptuous it was for me to walk around in my life and think I knew what everyone else should be doing all the time, and how much more loving it is to say, how can I best support you?
Her name is Terri Gibson.
Terri Gibson.
Terri Gibson.
Terri Gibson.
Terri Gibson.
Terri Gibson.
I hope I pronounce her name properly. Terri Gibson.
I am so excited for you to be here with me today. Thank you for joining us. Okay, so I have a really exciting interview to share with you here today. And one of the things that struck me the most about this interview was how much it applied, especially to our dear anxious attachment styles and fearful avoidance. In fact, I found so many parallels between the work of our guest today, Terri Cole, and the work we talk about and teach on this channel that I thought this was going to be such a powerful share. If you're not familiar with the work of Terri Cole already, Terri Cole is a psychotherapist and personal empowerment expert who has, for the last 20 years, combined the best practices from practical psychology and Eastern mindfulness to make profound and often complex psychological concepts accessible and then actionable so that you can create sustainable change. She has been featured in Forbes, on CBS, the New York Times, Oprah Daily, Vogue, ABC. I mean, I could go on and on about all of the impact that Terri has had on the world. And I am so excited to dive into this today. So in today's episode, we are going to talk really specifically about high-functioning codependency, something that I think all of our fearful avoidance and anxious attachment styles need to know. In fact, this topic even affects some dismissive avoidance, believe it or not. We are going to talk a little bit about what the signs are and symptoms of high-functioning codependency. We're going to go into some of the costs on your relationships, to your life. And then we're going to talk about a few key seeds to create empowered change around these patterns. Stay tuned, and I'm so excited to share this with you. Terri, you are wonderful. I've been a fan of your work for quite some time, and I'm so grateful to have you here on the podcast today. And I would just love for anybody listening or who's less familiar with you to hear first and foremost just about what got you into this work. Why is this a passion for you? Why do you write and create on these topics specifically?
Mm-hmm. Well, you know what they say, that you teach what you most need to learn. I think that's for sure true for me, that anything that I've learned in my own therapeutic journey, even long before I was a psychotherapist myself, I want to help other people lessen their own suffering and elevate their own joy. And it always blew my mind that therapy, when I learned how much therapy could help me change my life to be more like the way that I wanted it to be, I couldn't believe everybody wasn't doing it. Now, of course, we know everyone's not doing it because it's not accessible to everyone that's part of it, which is why I'm so passionate about just giving away so much material, because I feel like it should be available to everyone. So I think I teach what helped me the most, and that was therapy. So I really switched careers. I had a whole career as a talent agent, negotiating contracts for supermodels and celebrities before I became a psychotherapist, which nobody understood in my life. Why? I was like at the pinnacle of this. I was very ambitious. In my early 30s, I was running a New York bi-coastal talent agency, had really worked hard, and yet I got to this point and I was like, but I'm not happy. I'm not satisfied doing this. And the same time that I was leaping up the Hollywood ladder, I was also having this massive personal evolution through my own therapy, my own personal therapy. And I was like, wow, everybody can do this. And we just don't know it, but you can really change. Because I used to think, you're dealt a hand in life, and then you're just going to make the best of that hand. And what therapy proved to me was that I could say, I don't want this hand. I don't like this deck. I'm not playing this game. I'm literally creating an entirely new game. And then I did that, and I changed my life. Because it didn't matter what had come before. I really realized if I did the healing that I needed to do, and I got sober, there was a bunch of things that happened. It wasn't like a magical thing. But I still find it kind of magical that you can decide to change your life and then actually change your life.
Yeah, I love that. That's really powerful. And I do believe that, like, I'm such a big believer in the idea of the wounded healer, like somebody who just reads from the book and stuff like that and gets the knowledge and the education. I mean, that's amazing. And obviously, there's such a beautiful place in the world for that. But if you're somebody who actually went through things firsthand and healed yourself and did that inner work first, your ability to relate to people and to connect with people and truly understand what they're going through and empathize at a deeper level, I think is
Mm,
meaningful. And you can see that that's a special part of the work that you do. So,
yeah.
yeah, it's beautiful to hear that. So, you have an amazing book that's just coming out called Too Much, and it's all about codependency, but more specifically, like high functioning codependency. So,
Mhm.
do you mind sharing and sort of diving into the differences between like what we think of as traditional codependency and why you really decided to put the high functioning element around it?
Yes, I've part of what I think about codependency is that there's a lot of myths. There's a lot of limiting beliefs and understanding about it. So I'll just tell you, my definition of codependency is when we are overly invested in the feeling states, the outcomes, the situations, the circumstances, the finances, the relationships of the people in our lives to the detriment of our own internal peace.
Mhm.
Right. And we got to be specific because so many of us are empaths and we're highly sensitive people and we're lovers and we're mothers and we're sisters and we're citizens and we're friends. And of course, we care about the people in our life. We want them to get what they want. But when you're a high functioning codependent, you are overly invested, meaning it's like we can take it on as solving their problems as our responsibility and feel like we must do that. The reason why I added, because I actually I coined this term because I had a whole bunch of women in my therapy practice, probably like you, probably like me, very high functioning, very capable, like sort of the masters of the universe to a degree, like getting it all done. So when I would point out, like, hey, what you're describing, this is a codependent relational pattern that I see. The mention of codependency, they'd be like, yeah, no, lady, I'm not dependent on squat. Everyone's dependent on me. I'm making all the money. I'm managing all the people. I'm getting all the shit done. Like, no, there's no way. I'm definitely not codependent, which made me realize that we needed an upgrade. I needed to expand the definition of codependency, and B, that my clients actually didn't know what codependency was. They were very influenced by the Codependent No More, Melody Beattie,
Yeah.
gotta be enabling an alcoholic sort of definition or image of codependency. Because the irony with the flavor of codependency that I was in my life and what I've seen in my clients is different. It is high functioning people who are getting it done, but we're getting it done at the expense of ourselves.
Yeah.
And so the irony with high functioning codependency is that the more capable you are, the less codependency looks like codependency, but it is still codependency and we still suffer in the same way and burn out and we're exhausted. We've got autoimmune disorders and TMJ and insomnia, and then we're bashing into perimenopause and menopause, which really is the perfect storm for people to just be losing it between 35 and 65 in respect to doing all the things for all the people all the time.
So
Yeah.
powerful. And I'm curious to hear some of the roots, like some of the patterns and themes that I've seen that are so interesting is I think that often one of the not necessarily root causes, but one of the interesting elements of codependency is sometimes we do everything for everybody because we're just afraid to see people in pain. And it's almost like we want to change the way the world looks so that we can change how we feel about the world and
Yep.
change the people around us so we can change how we feel and we're not having to worry about other people around us. But
Yep.
underneath that, I've often found that people who are codependent are people who haven't actually felt through and healed the things they are projecting onto other people first and scared to see them experience. So, for
Yep.
example, if I'm trying to make sure that nobody feels abandoned, well, maybe it's because I have my own, abandonment wounds to solve for or
Yep.
feel through. And that was something I noticed along my own journey in the past. And I'm curious your thoughts on that as a whole.
Yes, I think that it would be really helpful for the audience. Let's go through the traits, let's go through the behaviors, let's go through the costs, and let's go through the fix. Like, what can we do? 100%. It's funny. One of the Gabor Mate has a quote about how exactly what you said is true, that your pain is causing me pain, and I would really like my pain to end. So I'm going to tell you what you do, and I'm going to jump in and try to fix what's happening. And that's exactly right. And of course, it's much easier for me to point out what you should do or what is wrong with you or how to fix what's happening with you, right? Because again, keep in mind, there's no malice in this. And I always think about this, and you guys have to remember, I'm in recovery. I'm a high functioning codependent in recovery. And this entire book, Too Much, is all about breaking this cycle of high functioning codependency so you can get into recovery as well. But I do not believe we can be cured per se. I think it's like any other compulsive behavior. I mean, I stopped drinking when I was 21, but I don't say like I'm cured from being an alcoholic. I just say I'm actively in recovery because I am. And if I started drinking tomorrow, I would no longer be in recovery, right? So this is sort of the same thing. If we look at what are the traits, if anybody listening and watching is like, gee, I wonder if this is me. So we can start with what we already talked about, feeling overly responsible for fixing other people's problems, right? For, again, our antennas are very high and we're monitoring for anyone being in pain, being unhappy. We do not want that. Giving until it hurts, right? Going above and beyond, even when you're not asked to, many times, because many of us, if you're an HFC, a high functioning codependent, you might also be an empath because we're very dialed into the feeling states of other people. You're always ready to jump into damage control mode, right? You're definitely a good friend to have in a crisis. If you're an HFC, we literally know how to get it done. We can jump right in. Nobody's panicking. Another trait is kind of being judgmental of others because we believe that there's a right and wrong way to do things. And we're very resourceful, right? We're highly capable people. So we're like, there's a way to do it. And if Betty had just taken my advice last month when she was complaining about this boyfriend, she wouldn't be in this situation right now. So we can get a little Judge Judy in wanting to control other people. And then we can be, just sort of kind of pissy if they don't take our advice. But other traits are feeling exhausted, feeling resentful, feeling underappreciated. Like we've really got to think about where in our lives do we feel a little bit bitter, a little bit like, after all I've done for these people, right? Because we do a lot for a lot of people. And another thing that we're doing as an HFC, inadvertently a lot of times, is that we're not having respect for other people's right to be self-determined, to be separate, right? Everyone has the right to succeed or fail, to thrive or flail. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. But if you're the HFC friend, you do not like that. You want to be like, I have an idea. I have a thought. So what do those behaviors look like? Well, we start with auto advice giving. Can't stop, won't stop. You have a problem. Oh my God, I have so many good ideas for your problem. So a lot of times we're not waiting for someone to ask us for advice. We're sort of just jumping into auto advice giving mode when someone tells us about a situation or what they're doing. A lot of times people are not even asking. They're telling us a story and we're like, oh, make sure that you tell, the Uber to take the 405 because the 110, I want to control which way you drive to where you're going. Like we're always thinking about avoiding problems. Auto accommodating is also another behavior of HFC where we are very dialed into, because you said something about the world, right? Like we're feeling the way the world feels. There's truth to that. And in fact, I write about that in this book, that one of the things that I see as different is that I promise you I could become codependently attached to fucking anybody, like to people I barely knew. I open up the book with a story of I'm in Long Island. This is like the late 80s, and I'm taking the train. It's 10:30 p.m. I'm taking the train back to Manhattan. Don't even ask why. My therapist was on Long Island, even though I was living in New York City, but whatever. Anyway, so I'm standing there, and there's this young kid, like a 19-year-old kid. Keep in mind, I'm about 22. And he's standing there and he has a little blanket in his hand, and he's got like a t-shirt on and like jeans, but he looks like I know he's not a New Yorker just by the way he looks. So immediately my helper radar was like, ping, I wonder what this guy's deal is. I wonder what's going on here. So we get on the train. His name is Billy. I'm like, oh, so what are you doing? He's like, oh, I was hired to drive a car back to Indiana, and they just canceled the gig. I go, so what are you doing? He's like, I don't know, I'm going. I go, what are you going to do? He's like, I'm going to the station. I go, yeah, you're going to what station? He said, Penn Station. I go, to do what? He's like, I think I'm just going to sleep at Penn Station. I was like, no, you're not. You can't sleep at Penn Station. Have you ever been there? It is so dangerous. You will definitely get mugged. Forget it. He goes, well, I don't know anyone in New York City. I was like, yes, you do. You know me. And I took this 19-year-old boy, who I just met on a train platform, back to my studio apartment with my female roommate without even asking her. Like, that may sound extreme, but that's what I mean, where other people's problems can really feel like your own when you are a high functioning codependent and when you're such a good problem solver.
Yeah.
I was like, this is not a problem. How could I let this kid sleep in Penn Station and get mugged or worse?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. Beautiful share. And yeah, that's a really powerful story where you see that hyper accommodation of things. I just wanted to pop in here and let you know we are doing a 7-day free trial to the All Access Membership Pass at PDS, which means you get access to literally everything inside of the school. And this includes the 4 live webinars I do with our students every single week. And on top of that, you get access to all of our different courses. We have over 55 different courses on relationships, communication, boundaries, emotional mastery, guilt and shame, learning your needs, so many different facets that are really important to master our lives and feel really good about our lives going forward. And last but not least, there's a daily community event. We have trained facilitators and coaches who are in there doing that work, showing up to support you on your journey every single day. Please join me on the other side. Come check it out. See if it's a fit for you. I'd love to see you there. Go ahead and sign up by clicking the link in the description box below. And I'm curious, like, what your thoughts are about root causes. And also the second question too, and we can sort of separate them out, but just, I also find that individuals who are codependent, it's funny because they overgive and underreceive and all these patterns that you've talked about, but they also really struggle to rely on other people at all. It's almost like I'm terrified of relying on somebody else because I don't trust that people will come through for me, and I don't want to feel helpless if somebody doesn't show up. And so I'm curious how that links into what is caused, what are the root causes of codependency, and how do these things sort of go together in your experience and what you see?
You know what is really interesting? That one of the traits that I skipped is hyper independence, but you caught it. And that is a fact. Being a bad receiver and feeling like, I mean, our mantras as HFCs are, I got it, or it has to be me. Like, we just don't trust. And part of it is we don't trust that other people will show up, or we don't trust that they're going to do it
properly.
The way that we want it to be done.
Right?
Because we know we will, but we're not positive that they're going to. But again, all of these things lead to becoming resentful, because if you end up doing, my mother had said to me, I was living with a boyfriend before I was with my husband, and I was complaining that he didn't know how to vacuum or brown garlic. These were the two things I complained about. I was like, what the hell is wrong with this guy? And she said, Tara, first of all, your father never touched a vacuum or a pan. So first of all, you're already doing better. And she said, and if you need everything done your way, you will end up like me, and you will end up doing it all, but you will end up doing it all alone.
That's powerful. Wow.
And I was like, good point. She's like, let him brown the garlic, let him, whatever he's doing, just be grateful he's wanting to be part of the solution. But let's circle back to your original question here, which is about causation. So what are the root causes of this? Well, we could say with codependency itself, I hate to say, let's go back to the scene of the crime, which is the family of origin, but we have to, because this is where it all resides. So we learn these behaviors, even if you did not have a traumatic or dramatic upbringing. If you were raised in North America anywhere, and probably Europe too. I mean, I've been teaching this stuff in 198, countries, and there's no country that women are like, yes, I was actually taught to assert myself, and my parents really cared how I actually felt. Nobody. Everyone says the same thing. I was raised to be a good girl, turn that frown around, Where's my happy girl? If you don't have anything nice to say,
Don't say anything at all.
correct. So there's a whole indoctrination of being nice and being a good girl. And then Canadians have it like 10 times worse than Americans. But
This is
but
true.
but but we all suffer from it, which is there is this association that to be a good woman means to be compliant, to be pleasant, to be agreeable. And there's all of these ways that society and the patriarchy have kept us in line. Like if you assert yourself, you're a bitch. If you're hysterical, you're a shrew. You're like there's all of this stuff that tells us that it's better to be nice than to be authentic.
Absolutely. I agree with how important, like, it's better to be nice and to be authentic is taught in so many different places around the world. And I think that it really raises this important topic as well of like the difference between being nice versus being good. And it's so interesting because sometimes I think of, I work with a lot of women and men, but a lot more so women over the years who came out of relationships with narcissists. And I found that
Mm.
they, in particular, that like demographic of women tended to be individuals who thought that at all costs, like they have to be nice. And so they would people please and they wouldn't call out red flags and they were boundaryless and all of these different things. And it's like, what you don't want to teach is conditioning for young children that, oh, just be nice, just be a good kid. And that means be obedient. Because if you're obedient, you're likely to end up in more abusive relationship dynamics, whether that be romantic, whether that be with a boss, but
Yep.
you'll put up with things that are actually not okay because you were so in that space of natural self-sacrifice because it's been a part of your conditioning for so long. And so I'm so glad you said that because I think that that's just a really powerful piece. And I also just want to re-highlight what you said, which is that it's not just trauma. It doesn't have to be big T trauma
Yep.
that
Yep.
causes these things. There can be a lot of codependency from, just the type of conditioning that's there and the type of messaging we get over time and how that has the capacity to really form our personalities. So beautiful,
Yes.
beautiful share.
In the book, I highlight one of the anchor stories, and one of the entire chapters is actually about high functioning codependents and narcissists,
Yeah.
because it is, as you said so astutely, it is incredibly common when you're a codependent to find yourself in these relationships. And when we look at the dynamic, it makes sense, right? You have a narcissist who's like, it's all about me. And you have a codependent who's like, yay, it's all about you. I can't wait to make you happy. So in a way, it's like this match made in heaven until all hell breaks loose, because it eventually will,
Mhm.
because eventually, usually the codependent can't take it anymore because the narcissist goes from love bombing and all of that stuff to being abusive, and then that gets tired. But the self-abandonment, when we think about the behaviors, you have auto-accommodating, which we talked about, and you have anticipatory planning, especially if you're in a relationship with someone who's abusive or difficult, where
Mm.
you're trying to anticipate
Every
all
need.
the things that
Yeah.
exactly every need and anticipate everything that could go wrong
Yeah.
so that you can ward it off from going wrong. And then you have the over and under functioning dynamic, which you mentioned before. But in all of these behaviors, there is an element of self abandonment that is sort of required in order for these dynamics to work, quote unquote. And I feel like that is the part that there's such a huge cost to the codependent, because we're always kind of willing to take one for the team. It
Mhm.
always feels like someone else, we're like great team players. We feel like someone else needs something more, it's fine. And even in the moment, if there's a crisis, if there's a situation, we're like, even something as silly as if you and your partner both were going to work and he goes outside and there's a flat tire, comes back in, and it's like, flat tire. You'd be like, take my car, I'll Uber. It's not a problem. Just go. Like he was already out the door. Like we do the things that sort of make sense. And yet it's again, not almost not trusting or not wanting to deal with the discomfort that comes for us when things are not neat and tidy and taken care of and fixed. So the cost to ourselves, like what is the cost to living this way? Why should people care? You know? And it's really, there's so much burnout There are so many health issues that I see in my therapy practice. Things that used to bring my clients joy, they just stop. Everything becomes obligatory when you are checking boxes all day long and feeling like you're doing for other people, but not allowing it to come back your way. So there's a bitterness that starts to happen. And people also don't know you.
Yes,
That this is painful.
that's
People don't know you.
yeah. Because you're never sharing your authentic truth. So how can you be seen and heard or known? And then what you see all the time is people feeling like I'm not really loved. People don't really care about me. I'm alone. And you said that earlier with the quote from your mother, but I just such a powerful thing to recognize. And part of it's, well, if you're only ever showing yourself on your best behavior with all of your conditions, then you're only allowing room for yourself to be conditionally loved. So I think that's so powerful what you said. And you talk about cost, and I'm curious, you said the burnout and the aloneness and that sort of distancing. What are some of the beautiful benefits as we go into talking about the healing from codependency? What are
Yes.
some of the benefits of healing? And then we can dive into how exactly to do just that.
The benefits are, first of all, being known, because that's super important and incredibly juicy and feels really good. There is so much more joy when you start to really realize what is my side of the street and what is someone else's side of the street. You gain so much bandwidth back when you stop trying to fix everyone else's problems, when you stop feeling overly responsible. And here's the thing, I didn't know, right? I was living this way because I thought this was love.
Mhm.
So, I had a sister who was in a bad situation. I write about it in the book, in an abusive relationship. And I was trying to get her out of it, but she wasn't ready to leave. And she was drinking and the guy was doing crack. It was a whole thing. And I had an amazing therapist who helped me realize when I was crying and saying, what am I going to do? I've done everything. I'm bawling my eyes out. And she just said, Terri, what makes you think you know what and how your sister needs to learn her lessons in this lifetime? And I was like, yeah, man, but can we agree that she doesn't need to do it with a crackhead in the middle of the woods without running water? And she said, no, because I'm not God. So I don't know how she needs to learn. But you need to figure out how to create boundaries yourself. You don't need to talk to her every day about this abusive situation that she's in. You can protect yourself and tell her that if she wants to get out, which I ended up doing, saying, hey, I can't talk about this, but when and if you ever want to leave, I'll always be your person.
Yeah.
I'll always come. And less than 9 months later, she called and was like, hello, are you still my person? And I was like, I'm getting in my car. And in her leaving then, she was able to become the hero of her own story, not her youngest sister being the hero of her story by manipulating and controlling and paying and all the things. And it wouldn't have stuck. Like my therapist really made it clear. She was like, Tara, I'm not saying you shouldn't save your sister. I'm saying you literally can't. It's like an impossible task. So you might temporarily be able to do something, but actually, the more money you throw at this and the more you intervene, you're literally taking away what she needs to experience to hit her bottom so then she can decide to make changes. And I was like, wow, that is intense.
So the summer is coming to a close, and now it's time to welcome in probably our much busier season. And if you're anything like me, the last place you probably want to be spending time is figuring out what to eat for dinner and standing in long grocery store lines. So you can make life easier with HelloFresh, which is America's #1 meal kit. With fresh ingredients and simple recipe cards delivered straight to your door, HelloFresh takes care of all of your meal planning, shopping, and meal prep. And I really can't express how much time HelloFresh has actually saved me each and every week. What I love most is the variety. So whether you're looking for fit and wholesome or quick and easy, vegetarian, or even family-friendly options, their ever-changing recipes keep food exciting when it comes to dinner and never leave me feeling like I'm making the same meals and just eating the same food over and over again. So if you're ready to save time and make cooking much more enjoyable for you and your loved ones, you can go for free breakfast for life at HelloFresh.com/free Thais. That's THAIS. And you'll get one free breakfast item per box while your subscription is active. That's free breakfast for life just by going to hellofresh.com/free Thais, THAIS. I was probably a high functioning codependent. I did this exercise. I used to do this with clients when I was running my practice, and I did this exercise on myself first, and then I used to share it with people. And I used to be so afraid of people being in pain. I hated discomfort in other people, sort of like we were talking about. And I could always do it. I could always take care of it, or just
Yeah.
so many of these themes. And um, I did this exercise one day, and I sat down and I looked at the hardest moments of my life, the most painful times. And I sat there and I asked myself a really hard question, which can be kind of confronting for people. And I said, how did this serve me? How did I grow? What did
Yeah.
I learn? What was I forced to let go of that was no longer serving in my life? And by the end of picking like the 4 or 5 most painful times of my life, and then actually really sitting with it and seeing the things that came out of it, I actually felt an experience of gratitude for those really hard times, because I was
Yeah.
like, these shaped me in such a deep way. And it was from that moment onwards that I realized pain can serve, and pain is sometimes a beautiful,
Mm.
although difficult, a beautiful
Yeah.
thing. And it made me not afraid of other people in pain, and allowing them that room or that space to learn their lessons on their time. And you said something so meaningful, which is like, you said, that's when it can stick. Or you said, it won't stick unless we really do it ourselves. And I think that there
Yes.
can be so many ways that we, like you said, as the youngest sister, manipulate or control or change it or do it for them. But then are they ever really learning those lessons that will set them up for the whole rest of their life? Or how do you know she won't go just back into the next relationship with similar patterns because it's what's comfortable and familiar? And so,
Yes.
and you said one other thing that I just wanted to highlight that was so powerful, which was that it doesn't mean that you don't say, hey, I'm here if you need me. I love you. I
Right.
care about you. You just respect their own autonomy in the process. And if they come to
Correct.
you, you can consider yourself and see what you can do, if anything, and see if you can be there. But trying to do it unsolicited, or when people aren't asking, or when they're not ready or willing, those are the times that it doesn't serve them, it doesn't serve us, and it doesn't even serve the relationship we have to those people. So I'm so glad that you touched on that.
Yes, but you make this great point though. It serves us in the short term because me solving your pain, quote unquote, in my mind, I get to get out of pain for that short term.
Yeah.
So even though it was painful to not continue to try to rescue my sister, the relief that I got from my therapist giving me permission to not, and for her basically explaining that I couldn't even believe it. I was like, oh my God, what a relief. And how beautiful to see my sister flourish in her own way, get sober on her own, go back to school, like take a hold of her life. It's very presumptuous, even though we're doing it from love. And listen, I thought it was Mother Teresa. I really did. Like it never entered my mind that it wasn't from a loving place. And I think that for most HFCs, it is that, but it's also control. No, any kind of codependency is a covert or overt bid to control other people's outcomes.
Yeah.
And we have to just get with that truth because that really is what it is. And it struck me after this whole thing with my sister, how presumptuous it was for me to walk around in my life and think I knew what everyone else should be doing all the time, and how much more loving it is, instead of auto advice giving, to be able to be in the foxhole with someone who's in pain and to say, how can I best support you right now? Or I don't know what to say, but I'm here.
Yeah.
Or if you want to talk, I'm here. But most importantly, the first thing I say to anybody who comes to me for advice is, what do you think you should do?
Yeah.
Because
And
that's the most important question.
absolutely. I love that. That's so powerful. And so you talk about how to heal, how to be in recovery, how to
Mm-hmm.
move through a lot of these different patterns. And I'm curious, where you would start for somebody who may be listening to this in this very moment going, oh, this is totally me.
Mm-hmm.
And what would be the first building block of how to heal this dynamic?
I think really to get a hold of, first of all, you want to look at where you're resentful. So you do a quick resentment inventory because that's going to act as a GPS
This is
to
so
the
true.
relationships. that need your attention, where you might be over functioning or over giving or over delivering. So that's the first thing we would do, is a quick resentment inventory. Who are you feeling resentment about? What is the situation, and what is your 50% of that situation, right? Because it's always 50 you and 50 me, because that's all it could ever be. Even if the other person is acting horribly, our 50% might be just staying, So that's the first thing. Second thing is to really pay attention to the auto advice giving, to really get clear about what is your responsibility and what isn't. And the next time anybody comes to you with a problem, accept that you're going to feel uncomfortable not fixing it, and that's okay. And ask them, what does their gut instinct say? What do they think they should do? And this is even with kids. You guys, it's like we get so scared to let kids make mistakes or have experiences or feel anything. And we're robbing them of their deductive reasoning skills and their conflict resolution skills and all these things that they need. So I'm not saying we just, hang them out to dry, but the way that we teach anybody to think for themselves is to be interested in what they think, is to say what your gut, especially to kids. I'm always like, hey, your gut instinct is great. Yeah. So tell me what your gut instinct says. If you did know the answer, what would it be? Well, let's think about it, or let's talk about it again tomorrow. Like, it can't be that the parent is endlessly centering themselves in the kid's experience. And this is the same thing with friends and loved ones and lovers. That when you think about what we're doing, and this was really hard for me personally to deal with, because it was so true and it was so ego dystonic, you know what I mean? Like, we're against how I would see myself, where when someone would come to me and when I would be like, I know exactly what you should do, I'm centering myself in their situation. I'm centering my grade A advice on their problem instead of centering my friend who's in pain. And it's way more loving, even though it requires you to tolerate the way you feel. But the truth is, it's way more loving to do that. So those are a few ways that we can start. But I think that, also you have to take care of yourself. There's a whole part of the book where I talk about self-consideration, which I have to say is different than self-care and self-love, because those two things, we talk about them all the time, but I feel like we're all like, what does it even mean? But self-consideration is like, before you agree to help Bob with that project at work, you stop and go, do I have the bandwidth to do this without becoming angry, without feeling taken advantage of, without being bitter? And if the answer is no, then we have to go back to Bob and say, hey, I actually don't have the bandwidth to help you with that right now. Perhaps someone in the other, department can help you. We have to let the chips fall where they may when they're not our chips. And yet I feel like being a people pleaser or coming from that school, it's very hard.
Yeah, yes. It's so funny. Our audience will laugh listening to this, because I talk about all the time the art of taking ourselves into consideration. And I actually go into like how it's different from self-care. And I often use, we probably both arrived here, but I often use Bob as a person in the analogy. Literally.
That's
people
funny.
Look in our programs like, oh, Bob. Because it's the easiest name to come up with an example. So anyways, that was so funny. But there's this really interesting part, which is we often have this compulsion, right? Like, okay, just do it for them, just fix it, just solve the problem right now. But if we can get this space in between where we're like, hey, where can I give when it's giving from truth, not from compulsion or from fear of something going wrong? And being able to say, let's say your neighbor comes over and says, can you clean my house with me all day Sunday? And you're like, oh my gosh, I've had a long week. And maybe you love your neighbor and you want to contribute. It doesn't necessarily have to be this hard yes or hard no. But sometimes it's like, you know what? I'm not going to come over and clean, but I'll drop by and bring you some coffee and I'll cook some extra breakfast. We can do these things where we give. But if we're not giving from that place of truth, if it's automatic, compulsive, and it's just from fear, then we lose that ability to take ourselves into consideration at all. And I couldn't agree more that that's such a powerful and important part of really healing that. So I have some really exciting news, and it's that integrated attachment theory training is back. In other words, you can be trained to become a relationship coach certified in integrated attachment theory in literally 60 days. So who's this for? Well, of course, this is for any individual who wants to make an impact and really be of service to others while also obtaining freedom and flexibility and abundance in their lives. And this is also for anybody who's already a counselor, a therapist, a coach, and just really wants to expand their toolkit. We've had so many people enter into the integrated attachment theory program because they're just looking to obtain a certain degree of mastery in terms of understanding their own attachment patterns and also the attachment patterns of maybe their children or partner or other loved ones in their lives, so they can really support those people and understand them more deeply. Now, please keep in mind that the last 2 times we ran this program, we filled up very fast. In fact, we oversold the programs and sold out completely. So if you're interested, click the link below to learn more and dive in with me. And I'd love to see you on the other side before seats run out. It's interesting too. I'm curious your thoughts about this, but when you externalize this idea, right? Like you take yourself and you're always solving other people's problems. You're always making sure that everybody else is okay. You're feeling for other people way more than you're feeling for yourself. The thing that shows up to me and that I start thinking of is, imagine if somebody else treated you like that all day long. Imagine if somebody else said, your feelings don't matter, put yourself last, put everybody else first. Who cares about what your experience is or if you're tired? They need you. Like, it would almost be a form of abuse. Like, it would at least be, neglect in a really big way. And so it's interesting that we end up in relationships with people who may mirror that back to us. And I'm curious how often you see that as an emerging theme or trend.
I do. And I always say that, your relationship with yourself is the most important relationship you'll ever have in your life because it sets the bar for every other relationship in your life. People are always looking to us and the way we treat ourselves. If you don't rest when you're tired, if you're honestly like always last on your own list, if you always give up the good things so someone else can do it, you're literally teaching people how to treat you. And they're like, oh, okay, so that's cool. So I can not consider this person, or they can be last on my list too, but they won't complain because they're used to it. So with self-esteem and self-worth, the reason we raise it is because then it raises the bar, right? For us, but then it raises the bar for every other relationship. But I do see that often and feel like being high functioning codependents, again, it can look one way because a lot of times we have a lot of external success. And from the outside, people are like, trust me when I tell you, nobody is checking on an HFC. Nobody is checking on a high functioning codependent. Nobody's checking on me. They're like, Terry's fine. She's always fine. She's the one we go to when we're not fine. And I feel like we have taught people that. And so part of the recovery process is we have to get used to disappointing people. Right? It's like Cheryl Richardson has the book out a couple of years ago called Let Me Disappoint You. I feel like this is a really important thing that as HFCs and good girls, we don't want to disappoint anyone. And you have to realize that you cannot do the highest and best for yourself and do the highest and best for everyone else simultaneously. Like, we have to, what you think, how you feel, and what you want matters, but it has to matter to you more than what anybody else in the world thinks, feels, or wants. And we were not raised to do that. And yet that's the truth, because you can always choose to compromise. We can always choose to meet in the middle. But when it really comes down to it, if we're going to have a healthy relationship with ourselves, what we think, how we feel, and what we want has to be our primary. We have to know it, and then we have to negotiate for it and fight for it and care about it. And I feel like as women, so many of us were taught that it's like not ladylike to negotiate or to go for what you want, and that it's like rude, or, and this is all the things that we're unlearning in this book too much.
I love that. That's so powerful. I often find too that there's this underlying story a lot of people have, like this sort of story of, if I disappoint people, everybody's going to think I'm bad, or everybody's going to abandon me, or then I'm not going to be good enough, or I'm going to lose my value, or I'll be excluded or disliked. We have these stories about ourselves of the worst case scenario. And it's almost like, okay, you have this story about the worst case scenario, but usually when you are codependent, it's the self-fulfilling prophecy. You end up feeling like that even more versus when you
Right.
truly live in your authentic truth and dive into the work that you're doing and the book that you have and do these underlying pieces of work, then you suddenly are showing up as your truest self. You have better standards in relationships. You'll have people who
Hmm.
treat you better as a result. And that's where you'll feel the opposite of all those things you were fearing to begin with. And I would love if
Yes.
you could share just to as we wrap here, a story of somebody, whether it was your own journey or a client that you had where they actually did this work and how that completely transformed their relationships externally because they transformed the relationship to self first.
So in the book, I talk about there is a mom, an Italian mom from Bensonhurst, and her adult son, Michael. And he moved into the city, when he was really young. And so they had established that, he would come home every week and she would do his laundry and she would make sauce for him every week. This is what they did. And when she came in to see me, she was like, I can't sleep. This is part of it. And I'm stressed out. And she was retired. So I'm like, why is this lady stressed out? Like I was thinking, but I was like, all right, I'll help you with the sleep stuff. And why don't we talk a little bit more about your stress? And we ended up getting to the point that she had this unspoken agreement of overfunctioning for her adult son because now he was in his early 30s. She'd been doing it for 10 years and she was resentful and she felt a little bit used and abused. And she kind of wanted a more voluntary relationship as opposed to this like perfunctory, you know, exchange. You know what I mean? Like I do this and then you do that. But she couldn't imagine in the beginning, she couldn't imagine not doing it. She's like, I'm afraid it's going to hurt his feelings, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, listen, you're resentful. That's hurting your relationship with him. And you will never know how flexible he is unless you have the conversation. So we came up with whatever. So she has the conversation. And to her shock, her son was like, Mom, I've been wanting to tell you that you don't need to do my laundry or make sauce for me for years, but I was afraid to hurt your feelings.
Oh,
I thought you liked doing it, which is so interesting because why would he think something different? How would he know? She kept doing it and there was no conversation. And so they were able to decide that wasn't going to happen anymore. But now they turned that from that conversation into meeting up weekly and going to different places in their Brooklyn neighborhood to have breakfast, talk about the week. Like, so they're still close, but now they're close and she feels so much more valued. And it was like she put herself in the position of being someone who worked for him, basically, and then felt resentful of him. So much of the time, this overfunctioning is a setup for making other people wrong eventually, when really it's something we did voluntarily. And in fact, she insisted on doing it. So that's like a story that just illustrates like it can change and you can grow and you don't even know how people will respond. And when you start to get honest with yourself, most of the people in your life are going to be like, amazing. I'm so glad you told me. I feel so much closer to you now, you know?
I love that. That's such a beautiful story. And I love that piece. Like, you don't even know unless you have that conversation. It could go that smoothly. So, thank you so much, Terry. So, please tell our audience where they can find your book and what your next sort of plan is and what projects you're working on.
Oh, well, first of all, I have a gift for your audience.
Yes.
So anyone listening who's like, I think I'm an HFC, but I don't even know where to start. I created an HFC toolkit for your listeners. So go to terricole.com/HFC for high functioning codependent. And you will find, there's ways to do less that I teach you. You got a self-love meditation, the power of no meditation. And there's also a link to buy the book. So you can buy the book there, or you can go to hfcbook.com. And I also have a community because I'm finding that women in particular are really wanting to be walked through this process. And in this new community, it's just Terri Cole membership, which you can see on my site. We meet weekly. And it's really just helping you through wherever you are, whatever it is. And it also comes along with my 4 of my signature courses. And it's like a monthly membership because my people have been asking me for it for so long. And I'm finally doing it with this book because so many people were like, I think I'm an HFC, but I might need a little bit of hand holding. I'm like, fantastic. I will hold your hand.
That's beautiful. Well, thank you so much for sharing your beautiful gift of all of this, your knowledge, your wisdom with our audience here today. And I can't wait for everybody to hear this. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform. Share it with friends and family who are on their journey of personal development and growth. And thank you for listening. Next week, we'll be back with more insights to guide you on your journey. And until then, keep practicing our tools and strategies to change your subconscious mind and apply some of the powerful learnings from this podcast so that you experience real life transformation.